Hey there, grade 7s. So last time we talked about how it is that when you are adding or subtracting fractions, they have to have the same denominator or a common denominator. So this time we're going to actually do some adding and subtracting of them. You'll see that our first pair of fractions here is 1/2 and 1/3. Before we can add these together, we're going to have to make sure that they have a common denominator or the same bottom number. So just like we worked on last time, I'm going to take this bottom number here, this 3, and I'm going to multiply it by the 1 and the 2. So 1/2 will become 1 times 3 is 3, and 2 times 3 is 6, and of course 3 over 6 is the same thing as 1/2. They're equivalent fractions. For this one over here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the other side's bottom number, this number 2, and multiply the top and bottom of this fraction by that. So 1 times 2 will be 2, and 2 times 3 will be 6. And now what I have is a pair of fractions I can actually add together because they have the same denominator. So 3/6 plus 2/6 gives me 5/6. We should always check to make sure our answer is in lowest terms, and this one is in lowest terms. There's nothing I can divide both 5 and 6 by to make it into a smaller fraction, so that one is right. Our next fraction over here is 2/5 plus 3/6. Once again, I want to make them have a common denominator before I add them. So I'm going to multiply this one, top and bottom, by 6 over here. 2 times 6 is 12. 5 times 6 is 30. I got 12/30ths. For this one over here, I'm going to multiply top and bottom by the 5, by the other fraction's bottom number. So 5 times 3, 15. 5 times 6, 30. And you can see that these are, of course, equivalent fractions. And I'm now able to add these two together. 12 plus 15. It gives me an answer of 27 out of 30. While this is already right, it is not in lowest terms. There's something I can divide the top and bottom number by. Sometimes we call this the greatest common factor. In this case, the thing I can divide both top and bottom by is 3. So 27 out of 30, if I divide them both by 3, 3 of course goes into 30 10 times, and 3 goes into 27 9 times. And so this is a lowest terms answer, and the way that we want them to be. Our last pair of fractions here is 3/4 plus 2/8. If I'm clever about this, although I could, of course, multiply top and bottom of this one by 8 and top and bottom of this one by 4, I might notice that I could instead just change this one, since, of course, 8 is a multiple of 4. So I could just make this one doubled. I could multiply top and bottom of this one by 2 and leave this one as it is, and then I'd be able to solve this. So I'm going to take a look at this one here, and I'm going to do, I multiply top and bottom by 2, so this one's going to be 6 out of 8, and this one, of course, stays as 2 out of 8, and the whole thing becomes 8 out of 8. Now 8 out of 8 is, of course, a whole. That if there was 8 slices out of an 8-slice pizza, that means that the whole thing is there. So that's just one whole. Just one, basically, is the answer to it. Now, some of you might be noticing that rather than changing both of these to be out of 8, I actually could have made this one out of 4 instead. So if I had done that, I would, of course, have 3 out of 4, and 2 out of 8 is the same thing as 1 out of 4 if I would divide top and bottom by 2, and that is 4 out of 4. Again, that's one whole. So either way, it gets me to the same answer. So both ways would be correct. So let's take a look at some subtracting next. The rules are exactly the same for subtracting fractions. Before I can subtract them, I have to make sure that the bottom numbers are the same, that they have a common denominator for both of them. In this case, I'm going to take the top and bottom of this one and multiply it by 2. So what we're going to have is going to be 8 out of 10. This one over here, I'm going to take the top and bottom and multiply it by 5. And this one's going to be 5 out of 10. I subtract the top numbers, I subtract the numerators. It leaves me with 3 out of 10, which is already in lowest terms, so it's all good. Over here, I have a whole, and I'm going to subtract 2/3 from it. Even when dealing with this kind of thing, I need to make sure I have the same denominator for both of them. So I'm going to make this whole also a number that's out of 3. If this pizza was in 3 slices and the whole thing is there, then 3 out of 3 slices would be there. So I can do 3 out of 3 as my whole to use for subtraction here. 3 out of 3, take away 2 out of 3, leaves me with 1/3, which again is already in lowest terms. So the answer is good, just the way it is. Our last one here, 4 out of 7, take away 2 out of 14. Once again, I might notice that rather than multiplying top and bottom by 14, which would be a tougher math problem, and top and bottom of this one by 7, which again is not great, instead I could just multiply top and bottom of this one by 2, and that would make it out of 14. So let's do that instead. So if I multiply the top of it by 2, I would have 8. If I multiply the bottom of it by 2, I would have 14. And now I can do 8 out of 14, take away 2 out of 14, which leaves me with 6 out of 14. In lowest terms, I could divide top and bottom of this by 2, so I could make it 3 out of 7. And that would be the correct answer. Some of you might have noticed again that rather than changing these two numbers, I could have actually changed these two instead. So if I would have done that, I would have still had 4 out of 7, of course, to start with. And my 2 out of 14, if I divide these both by 2, it could have been 1 out of 7. 4 out of 7, take away 1 out of 7, still gives me 3 out of 7. So you can see how both methods get you to the right answer in the end.